Good morning. I'm Tom Jones. I'm the Executive Director of the Faith Inclusion Network, and I want to welcome you to our webinar today. Uh, we want to, the Faith Inclusion Network is an interfaith organization that focuses on the inclusion of people with disabilities in faith communities. And one of the things we wanted to do in February this month is to recognize JDAIM, the Jewish Disability Acceptance and Inclusion Month. And so Rebecca Wolf, our Interfaith Engagement and Faith Inclusion Coordinator, was so gracious to pull this panel together. And so we are very honored to have with us Howard Blas and uh, Howard and some of the contributors to this the new book that they've done called A Different Spirit, Creating Meaningful B'nai Mitzvah for Children with Disabilities. And uh, so we're very pleased and delighted to have everybody here today. We recognize that we have mostly a Jewish audience, but as I read the book as a Christian minister in the faith and disability field, it was all of the ideas, the insights, the disability experience, the strategies that were listed. Those can be applied to everybody in every faith. And so I found it just so delightful of reading from our Jewish contributors and seeing how much we have in common as far as
Mhm.
our work with people with disabilities and helping them to belong to our faith communities. So I am very thrilled to have everybody on this panel. And let me just introduce some briefly. And Howard Blas is the senior advisor to the National Rama Network, which provides inclusion and vocational training support for young adults with disabilities in camps throughout the U.S. and Canada. He has a social worker and special education. He's a social worker and special education teacher by training, and he also teaches Jewish studies and bar bat mitzvah to students with a range of disabilities and special circumstances. He leads many birthright trips to Israel, and he's also writes for many different publications. And a special thank you. Howard is a former Finn board member, a great advocate, and has connected the Faith Inclusion Network with so many Jewish events and Jewish efforts to reach and to serve those with disabilities. I appreciate all the work that you've done there, Howard, for Finn and otherwise. Howard is the editor of A Different Spirit, Creating Meaningful B'nai Mitzvahs for Children with Disabilities. And we're happy to have three contributors. Dr. Stephen Shore is with us. He's an autistic professor of special education at Adelphi University. He's written books that include College for Students with Disabilities, Understanding Autism for Dummies, Ask and Tell, and Beyond the Wall. Currently, Stephen serves on the board of Autism Speaks and is one of the first two autistic board members in its history, looking to improve the potential of those on the autism spectrum. He once headed the Asperger's Association of New England and was on the board of the Autism Society of America. Such great experience. We're happy to have you with us, Stephen. Elaine Hall, Coach E, is a renowned neurodiversity pioneer, author, speaker, and founder of the Miracle Project, an inclusive theater program for autistic and disabled individuals. After her adopted son was diagnosed with severe autism, she developed a methodology using movement and theater, which was featured in the Emmy-winning HBO documentary Autism the Musical. I love that music. I love that program. I'm so happy to
Mhm.
have you. She created the 7 keys to unlock autism technique used in her programs and detailed in her books. She's the founder of the Miracle Project, and she's a consultant for inclusive entertainment. Her memoir, Now I See the Moon, was selected by the United Nations for World Autism Awareness Day. She's also recognized for her work in the Jewish community, having co-created the Nes Gadol B'nai Mitzvah program. So happy, Elaine. And my daughter is a theater major and an actress in Chicago. And so I'm telling her all about you. Uh,
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
and we're pleased to have Rebecca Redner. Rebecca's an educational specialist at Gateways, Access to Jewish Education in Boston, where she aims to make Judaism accessible, joyful, and meaningful for students of all abilities. Rebecca has worked with diverse learners in the lead teacher as the lead teacher and coordinator of the Gateways B'nai Mitzvah program for over a decade, and as the author of Gateways Haggadah 2015 and the Gateways Shabbat Family Companion in 2016. She graduated from Boston University with a bachelor's degree in special education and holds a master's of Jewish education with a certificate in special education from Hebrew College. We're so glad to have all of you here today. And for our audience, I want you to know that there will be questions, time for question and answers. So please put those in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to those questions at the end of our panel discussion. And so now I want to turn it over to Rebecca Wolf as she'll lead us and guide us through our discussions. Rebecca?
Thanks, Tom. Well, first, I would like to introduce Howard, who's going to give us an overview of the book in general and kind of the process, and then we'll go into a discussion with our contributors. So, Howard, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you, Tom, for the kind words and for all you do with Finn. Um, so everybody is very kind and brave, especially people who are not Jewish, to sign up for a webinar with the word B'nai Mitzvah in the title. Tom, you get such good credit for the Hebrew pronunciation. You've tackled so many tough words, and even in your introduction. So good job. And even members of the Jewish faith might not know what the word B'nai Mitzvah that's in this title of our book actually refers to. So, I'll get there. But that's really part of what makes Finn so special. As Tom mentioned, I was privileged to be a board member. But what attracted me to the organization, the Faith Inclusion Network, was that during COVID, there was a similar webinar to this. And a light bulb went off in my head when an imam during the webinar who was speaking about mosque accessibility was speaking, and it occurred to me that I never even thought about mosques dealing with the same issues that our synagogues and our churches are dealing with. And I realized that it's wonderful to have an organization that brings together people around these same issues. So for the curious, B'nai Mitzvah is simply the plural of bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah and bar mitzvah, if that helps. So the title of the book, therefore, is A Different Spirit, Creating Meaningful B'nai Mitzvah for Children with Disabilities. So in the Jewish, a quick basic about, what is bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, for those who don't know. In the Jewish religion, one is required or at least permitted, depending on your approach, to take on the responsibilities of being a Jewish adult at age 13 if you're a young man, or 12 if you're a young woman. I think the rabbis knew something that we also know very well. They knew that just young women get there faster than young men when it comes to cognitive development and taking responsibility for your actions. So what happens at that age of bar bat mitzvah? You can count in a quorum, what we call a minyan in the Jewish religion. You could lead the community in worship and prayer, in reading from the Torah, or the Bible. You could serve as a witness, etc. People often use the term, oh, he got bar mitzvah, or we're having a bar mitzvah. I substitute bar and bat mitzvah equally, but actually one becomes bar mitzvah automatically. And in many ways, that is the point of this book, that there is really no one way to mark becoming bar or bat mitzvah. I say that because if you've ever attended a bar or bat mitzvah, they tend to look pretty similar. Many communities have norms and expectations of how to mark this transition, which usually includes some type of public reading of a sacred text, often chanting. It can be quite challenging, delivering a speech, often wearing formal clothes, which can be pretty chafy and uncomfortable, whether or not you have sensory issues. I don't know too many 13-year-olds boys who like to put on a tie when your shirt is buckled up to your neck. Oftentimes, following the large, prayer service, there's an equally awkward celebration, and a lot of kisses from aunts that you may have never met, in a big social hall, and that doesn't work for a lot of people. Not to mention the rigorous learning process that's often required in another language, that requires a lot of memory, chanting from books and ancient scrolls. So the starting point is it doesn't really work for a lot of people. So I'll tell you how I got into this field, because most guys my age have more traditional jobs and aren't still teaching kids for bar and bat mitzvah, though I'm glad I don't have one of those other kind of jobs. Somewhere around 1984, I started working in a Jewish summer camp, which, again, good job, Tom. It's called Camp Ramah, not an easy word to pronounce. It's the camping arm of the conservative movement. We have over a dozen camps in the US and Canada. And I showed up there to work in the kitchen with my best friend, and quickly got rerouted to what's called the Tikva program, which is the program that includes people with disabilities. I've talked about this in Finn for a whole other webinar. It's pretty radical that in 1970, two special educators had this idea that people with disabilities should be included in a typical summer camp, but that's for a different time. It changed my life. It sent me to graduate school for social work and special education. And, like many Jewish graduate students, teaching religious school sure beat flipping burgers when it came to paying the rent. And little by little, I kept getting approached. There was always this kid they didn't know what to do with in this Hebrew school or that Hebrew school. He or she was having a hard time learning and preparing for a bar bat mitzvah. So it became, call Howard was sort of the what I kept hearing around New York City. And what started off as sort of quote unquote special needs became special circumstances, and it became teaching kind of creatively and out of the box bar and bat mitzvah services that deviated from what I just described. So now let me tell you how we got to Alana and to the book. So in Jewish summer camps, there is one horrible day every summer, which is called, where the camp celebrates, or rather marks what's called Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, which marks the destruction of the first temple and the second temple and the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. You name the tragedy, it happened on the day, according to our tradition. And it's a very long fast day, more than 25 hours. It's very hot, no eating, no drinking traditionally. And the camp has to come up with more chill activities. So instead of the usual routine, something a little chill. So I suggested to the director that we bring Alana Trackman and her movie that she's probably best known for, though she's out on the road, with another movie and another. Praying with Lior is an award-winning movie where Alana followed this young man, who's now a man with Down syndrome, as he prepared for bar mitzvah, as his family figured out what to do for bar mitzvah. And I convinced the director, who was reluctant at first, to bring Alana and her movie to camp and to show it to the whole camp community. I had never seen it either. And it was a resounding success. And, the light bulb, when we had a chance to talk, Alana and myself, the light bulb went off for both of us. And we realized that I was the guy everybody was coming to it and saying, can you teach this my kid? I was doing the teaching and the running of the bar and bat mitzvahs. And every time Alana would screen this movie, people would come up and say, let me tell you about my kid who is, whatever compared to Lior. He's better or worse, this, that, could never do that, could do more. And I shared with her that I had always had this secret idea to put all these stories of kids I worked with into a book. And I know I'm in the company of people, certainly on the panel, and I see in the audience too, who have written books. And it is a very humbling experience. It only took us about, 15 years or more from that conversation to get to the book. But we realized that maybe doing this together would be better. We bring in our different experiences. And we even came up with an outline, and we approached Behrman House many, many, many years ago. And I would say years passed and many fits and starts, and then COVID came, and then we buckled down, and then we rethought the idea. This time we imagined a book for families and clergy and teachers, and we hope, as Tom mentioned, for people in other faith communities. And we imagine this time the real shift would be contributors would include people who identify as neurodiverse and people with disabilities, and clergy and professionals from special education or speech and language therapy, and that the book would offer guidance on how to navigate creating meaningful and inclusive celebrations for everyone. But so what I'm basically saying is that we realized that the more perspectives we had, having a deaf rabbi or a blind young woman and her mother who created a service, or an autistic professor, or all these different people. And it would be essays and practical guidance on planning the celebration and managing accommodations and settings and teaching children with a wide range of support needs. So here we are. And thanks to Behrman House, they stuck with us. Obviously, these days, it's not easy to convince publishers that there's a need for books at all, much less something that's so specific, a Jewish ritual that it applies to such a small group of people. But we think that it's the kind of book that will be evergreen, meaning that it will be around forever. It can apply, as Tom said, in your church or in your mosque. The ritual might be different, but autism is going to look the same, and mobility issues are going to look the same. And we were blessed with a funder whose child I worked with many years ago, who said, we want this book to get into the hands of rabbis. And they gave us quite a good start by committing to purchase 3,000 copies to go to rabbis of all denominations. And I don't know who those rabbis are, except I've gotten some wonderful emails saying, thank you for the book. So it's actually quite beautiful, because they think that here I am generously sending them a book. But, we've really been trying to do that. That's really exciting. And I kind of imagined, a rabbi who has no experience with a blind bat mitzvah, and a family saying, listen, I want to come talk to you in an hour, Rabbi, about options. My daughter is blind or deaf. And instead of panicking and wanting the floor to open, the rabbi flips to the book, to that chapter, and sees an example of 4 or 5 bar bat mitzvahs. So the general structure of the book is as follows. There's an overview with essays by Shelley Christensen, who has been for decades a leading voice in disabilities inclusion and belonging, a longtime Finn board member who actually brought me to the board, one of the founders of JDAIM, Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance and Inclusion Month. There's also an essay by Rabbi Menachem Creditor. Both of the authors show how inclusion elevates and creates a sense of belonging, and how bar and bat mitzvah affirms the really important tenet in Judaism and other religions about being created in God's image. And then Dr. Shore is our first essay in the voices section, which spoiler alert, it's in gray, which, to note that these are people's voices, people reflecting on their own experiences. And then there are 2 parts. Part 1 has 10 chapters. Part 1 looks at creating inclusive communities and building supports along the journey, dreaming and imagining and planning, the role of siblings, Elaine Hall's essay on invoking the arts in the bar and bat mitzvah process. You'll get more from her soon. Bar and bat mitzvah in summer camps, and then a very thoughtful dialogue between a rabbi and an advocate on if and when bar mitzvah should be off the table. Are there some extreme cases where it shouldn't even be considered? Read the book. Part 2 gets very specific. This is one of my favorites. What if I bark on the bima? The bima meaning the podium where the service takes place. Asks Jewish educator and comedian Pamela Schuler, who speaks openly about Tourette's syndrome. There are chapters offering tools to teachers using multi-sensory approaches to Hebrew, Braille bar bat mitzvahs, deaf and hard of hearing by a deaf rabbi, chapters on learning disabilities and mental health challenges, speech impairments, mobility challenges. Rebecca Redner, with co-author Arlene Rems, who I see is joining us today, worked on with 3 chapters, a checklist on getting started, a multi-sensory approach to teaching Hebrew, and a guide to preparing non-speaking students. The list of contributors is too many to mention, but they really, as I mentioned, come from all different fields. And what was, in the end, it was our idea about what was the role that Alana and I played. We found these wonderful contributors. We really crafted the chapters, and a lot of editing and reworking with the amazing team at Berman House. And for me, I got to spend months going through the files of probably the 400 students I worked with over the years to look for the right stories and anecdotes to support the points that were made by our authors. And that was really fun. So, if this has taken place, then you could say this is how people do it, right? It's a fact on the ground. If this is how people, this is one example and another and another. So thank you very much. I'll now turn it over. I gave a shout out to some of the contributors, and I guess Rebecca, I'll turn it back to you to introduce our speakers in the order that you wish. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks for the overview, Howard. And I think that got people's intrigue going, like a little teaser of what you can expect from this book. And it's special because we have so many different perspectives. And I think there's at least 20 or more authors. Correct me if I'm wrong, Howard, but there are so many different lived experience. You kind of highlight like voices of lived experience. Then we also have educators, we have parents. So I'm excited because we have a range of perspectives here with us today. So let's just jump in and find out from our 3 speakers what got you into this project? Why is inclusion important for you personally or professionally or both? And also, why do you think inclusion for bar and bat mitzvah is so important? Why is this an important issue? So, would anyone care to start?
I guess I'll go first.
Great.
All right. So, what brings me here? What brings me to contribute to the book and makes me do the work that I do is Howard so clearly explained, and also Tom, being autistic, I come from an inside point of view. And I was lucky enough, fortunate enough, thank God, that my parents had the wherewithal to implement what we today refer to as an intensive home-based early intervention program. That terminology didn't exist yet. And a big part of that involved music. And I also remember during that time listening to a recording of Tumbalalaika over and over and over again. So that kind of got stuck in my mind too. So we fast forward to my preparation for a bar mitzvah, and it took us a few tries. We first tried the traditional route, Hebrew school. didn't work. It was boring, too many bullies. It just didn't work. My parents were not very observant, so they said, okay, then just won't go. Then, as 13 was approaching, they tried another traditional route and hired a tutor to teach me Hebrew so that I could then read the prayers and the Torah as needed. And that sort of worked, mostly not, but sort of did, not really. And we even tried a second tutor, which also didn't work. And then I guess through guidance from God, somehow my parents realized that if it's too hard for me to read Hebrew, maybe I could sing it. And what they did is they got one of the cantors at our temple at that time to sing it all out and record it on a cassette tape. And I listened to it over and over and over. And by the time it was time for my bar mitzvah, I was all set. And really, what it was a big, long, delayed echolalia session. And I actually had a good time doing it because I knew my material. I remember uh, uh, possibly the rabbi as I was reading from the Torah, he was moving the yad across the words in the Torah. And I was kind of fascinated to see how what I was saying translated to what was in the Torah because, again, I couldn't really read Hebrew. Uh, so it became interesting to watch. And in that way, I was able to participate, which leads me to believe that Howard, as you so aptly put it, uh, bar mitzvah, b'nai mitzvah, whatever we call it, transition to adulthood, it happens automatically. That's something that God decided to do, and it just happens. It's just in relatively recent history, we've decided to commemorate that in some way. And I believe that we should find a way to commemorate that. And might be the way I did it. It might be the way my brother did it, who was diagnosed with mild to moderate retardation. I think he has some autism thrown in for spice. He needed more support. And I think what is really key is that if the person who is going through the B'nai Mitzvah ceremony has at least some understanding as to the significance of what's happening, that's a success. And that occurs in so many ways, and possibly even a word of Hebrew isn't even uttered. That doesn't matter because God understands. And the more that I can promote this happening for autistic and otherwise neurodivergent individuals, people with disabilities, I think the better off we'll be. And I can't really speak for God, but I think that's something that God would like.
Thank you, Stephen. I was just thinking about the fact that many young people without disabilities don't necessarily always get the meaning from a traditional ceremony. I'm thinking back to when I was having my uh, bat mitzvah, and in our class, you know, you're trained for a period to memorize and study, and sometimes, at that age, you're going through the motions because you're being told to do that. But I've heard that in a lot of cases, including the film that Howard was talking, Praying with Lior, which we featured last year, that a lot of times those bar and bat mitzvah ceremonies are especially meaningful. Um, and I would also like to hear from Elaine because I know in the book you talk about your son's bar mitzvah, and you also have worked with so many young people in different ways using music and theater and movement and art. So I would love to hear more about how you do that and how the young people find meaning through that.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm just so honored to be here. And thank you, Tom and Howard, for bringing us all together, and my brother from another mother, Stephen. Um, I would listen to God through you anytime, any day. So you can speak for God. And Rebecca, wonderful to meet you, a cousin of one of my co-collaborators, Rabbi Jackie Redner. So just a joy. And thanks, Rebecca, for putting this together. Uh, so much to share on this topic. Stephen, your share reminded me of myself as a child. My father taught me, he was the bar mitzvah teacher at our synagogue. So I got kicked out of Hebrew school, and I have a little bit of, well, kind of a lot of ADHD, and I'm neurodivergent myself. So my dad was my tutor, and it was so beautiful, that experience of learning with him and from him. And he he was just a very joyous man, and so learning from a young age the many different ways. And I was a girl, and I was not allowed to read from the Torah. So I have to say, my son experience is what brought me to be able to stand beside the Torah for the first time. I was a TV and film coach, and what I wanted was a child of my own. I wanted to be called Mama. I was called Coach E, and I adopted a little boy from Russia. If I couldn't, bring my genetics to a child, I wanted to bring my country, where my grandfather and grandmother came from Russia. So I brought this beautiful little boy home from Russia, and when he came to me, he spun around in circles and stared at his hand for hours at a time. And we did not have you amazing educators at the time in the Jewish community, and I was kind of alone with autism. But I found that when I joined his autistic world, we created a liminal space where we both belonged. And if he spun in circles, I'd spin with him. And if he'd flap his hands, we'd be birds flapping together. And now Stephen and I flap whenever we can. So, but but basically joining his world through creativity and meeting him where he was, because that was my background, was the creative world. My cousin Gloria would constantly send me articles about youth with disabilities, and becoming bar mitzvah, and learning in a different way. And I would just kind of poo-poo. Thank you, Gloria. I love you. Thank you very much, because I'm too busy with therapies. We've been kicked out of synagogues, even the most well-meaning synagogues, and so lo and behold, my son's 12th year, I was invited to Vista Del Mar, where Rabbi Jackie is the leader, the spiritual leader. I was invited to Vista Del Mar to create a bar and bat mitzvah program. Was known through the community through my success with the Miracle Project and Autism the Musical, and where we used creativity, music, movement, uh, drama to reach some of the, people would consider maybe the most unreachable youth, but we put on original musicals. And so when they invited me to Vista Del Mar to create a bar and bat mitzvah program, I'm like, sure. I always learned you always say yes, because you can always say no. And I gathered together a cantor, Rabbi Jackie, other clergy, and use the same principles from that I used with the Miracle Project, which is the 7 keys to understand autism and disability, which has nothing at all to do with the person that has that shameless plug. Stephen was wrote the foreword to the 7 keys to unlock autism, and but basically, it's the 7 keys are not about the autistic or disabled person. They're about the person who's in communication with them. And how do we show up as a teacher, as an educator, as a clergy, showing up with curiosity, with an intention to learn, understanding different sensory needs and access points, breaking things down into small, manageable tasks, being able to follow the lead, which is what I did with my son. And that's a whole nother story of following his lead. But following the lead and the need of the person in front of us. So by doing so, that's how I created theater with kids on the spectrum, and any kid that got kicked out of anywhere else. So how do we use that for bar and bat mitzvah? And it all started with the parents. I'd meet with the parents privately in my office. And I always share that, bar mitzvah is not translated into bar bat mitzvah is not translated into English as big party. It's not, it's, as Stephen and Howard said, it's just when we get to go to the Torah, that's it. It's not about anything. It's not about having to read all the prayers on Shabbat. It's not about any of that. It just is. When a young woman is 12, today it's 12 or 13, and a young man is 13, they are already a bat mitzvah. And it's how do we want to, as Stephen said, commemorate it? And for those who experience the world differently, how do we do that? How do we follow their lead, follow their interests? And there's so many different ways. If we are open to that child in front of us, what lights them up? And it doesn't mean they've got to recite, they don't even have to speak in Hebrew. I share in a different spirit. One of the most powerful moments, we had a B'nai Mitzvah student who does not speak, and he uses a walker. And we helped him prepare for his bar mitzvah in a very large Orthodox synagogue in Los Angeles. And he needed to get from his seat up to the bima, to the podium. And it took about 5 minutes from him to get to his seat. And the congregation was silent for 5 minutes. And I have to say, it was one of the most spiritual experiences of my life. I still remember that bar mitzvah where he walked and everyone was with him and God was with us. And he walked up to the bima and to the Torah. That was his bar mitzvah. It was so beautiful. So for all of us to be open, curious, aware, non-judgmental, throw what we thought had to be. Remember, we were all at Sinai. It didn't matter. We were all at Sinai, right? And the idea of inclusion, Shelley Christensen has a beautiful book called From Longing to Belonging. The idea is not about including or accommodating those with disabilities. It's about we all belong. It's about belonging. And how can we elevate the congregation with 5 minutes of silence? With my son did Shema, because the Shema was in, and that was his words. He typed his drosh, and my husband, his stepdad, read his drosh, and he danced his prayer. So allowing the congregation to have those moments, elevating true communication with God and the spirit, the different spirit of someone who experiences the world differently.
That was really beautiful, Elaine. And I was really touched by your chapter. And I have to say I do recommend Elaine's book, her memoir, which is also very touching, which we mentioned, and we can give a link. But in your chapter, I could feel the emotion, even just from the writing, about what the experience is like when you're dancing or when the speech is being read, not by the person, but you can still feel what the essence of it is. So thank you. And Rebecca, actually, I wanted to get to you because you have a whole chapter about nonverbal um, young people, and you also have several other chapters. So could you talk a little, I guess, from the educational perspective, or I don't want to, make you say too much about all of these chapters, but maybe you could talk a little about some of that. And I also really like one of your chapters has a bar and bat mitzvah, like a visioning checklist, which was really helpful. So people can go through and I think, as Elaine or Steven said, think about what is the individual needs. So maybe you could share either about that or the nonverbal or all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's wonderful to be a part of this panel. Just for a little bit of background, how I got into this project was through my co-author and my mentor, Arlene Rems, who was the founding executive director of Gateways Access to Jewish Education here in the Boston area. And I'm very, very fortunate because this organization existed when I was in high school, and I was actually able to volunteer for this organization in high school and volunteer in their brand new B'nai Mitzvah program. And sort of based on that experience, I was able to go into special education and then come back to Gateways. And for my entire professional career, be immersed in an environment where there's never a question of whether a child can have a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah. We're always starting from a place of, well, yes, of course they can. How are we going to make this happen for them? So that's where I'm coming from in writing these chapters. And inclusion is just so important to these families and to these children. So many of them, they crave connection to the Jewish community, to Jewish tradition, to God, and like these children, even if they don't have an academic background in all this, they feel it in their gut. They've got the Jewish soul. They really feel it, and the bar bat mitzvah traditionally, Rebecca, when you were talking about your experience with your bat mitzvah and Elaine with yours, there's been a lot of gatekeeping in the past. A lot of synagogues have a list of requirements. In order to become bar bat mitzvah, you must lead these prayers. You must read an entire Torah portion. You must do all of this. And these requirements have kind of become, we envision them as though Moses carried them down Mount Sinai on the two tablets. And like, this is what a bar mitzvah has to be. And that's not the case. And that's really pushed a lot of people, neurotypical and neurodivergent, away because they don't feel welcomed and it wasn't quite right for them. So it's and when this is a very important time in a child's life. So when they're feeling excluded from their synagogue at this point, they feel like the Jewish community doesn't want them, and their families feel like the Jewish community doesn't want them. So really, when a synagogue is able to be open to doing something different, it's kind of like the ultimate embrace of course we want you and we want you exactly as you are. And it sets up the children to have like a good Jewish life. When they're embraced like that, they want to come back to synagogue. And when they're given the opportunity to learn, they have the tools they need to be able to participate in synagogue through adulthood. We've had several students have their B'nai Mitzvah and afterwards say, oh, when can I do this again? And that's kind of the ultimate goal. The goal isn't just for students to learn how to do this prayer, that prayer, read Torah. The goal is for them to want to be Jewish adults and want to use what they've learned. So going back to the checklist, we started using this checklist for new students in our B'nai Mitzvah program at Gateways. Gateways, um, we have we support students in day schools, we support students in Jewish preschools, we support students in religious schools, but we also have our standalone program for students who either need or want an environment that's really built around the needs of students with disabilities. And what we found is that it really helps us to get on the same page with the parents in terms of what their expectations are, what they envision. So there have been times when there's been a bit of a mismatch where we think, oh, this student can, of course, do this, that, and the other. And the parents are thinking, no, I really only want them to do this. Or there have been times when we thought, oh, I'm not sure if the student can do this, but the parents are very confident. Oh, our son can absolutely do this. And so having this form can really help us have that conversation and bring us into accord with one another. But actually, the more important thing about it is over the years, this checklist for people who haven't seen it, it goes over like how long should the bar mitzvah be? Like if you were to envision the ideal bar mitzvah for your child, would it be 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour? Where would it be? Would it be in the big synagogue? Would it be in the rabbi's study? Would it be in your home? And over the years, the biggest value of this form has been parents coming back to us and saying, I didn't realize we were allowed to do that. So it kind of opens up the gates for them because it makes them realize, oh, we we don't have to fit into the mold of what we thought. Like we don't have to do what we did when we were having B'nai Mitzvah. We can actually put our child at the center and think of what would be ideal for them and build the B'nai Mitzvah around that, as opposed to trying to fit them into the mold that doesn't necessarily work for a lot of people, whether or not they have disabilities.
Thank you. And would you say that you have at Gateways, do you work with a whole range of disabilities, or is it mostly, I wanted to check with you about that.
So it's a really, really wide range. We have some students who have pretty low support needs. They come to us for a little bit of academic support. But they're students who aren't included in all of their classes in public schools. They might be students with language-based learning disabilities, like dyslexia. They need help learning how to decode Hebrew. They might be students who are perform very high academically, but need have anxiety or have difficulty with social situations. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have students who have very, very complex needs, very high support needs, students who might be in wheelchairs, students who might have significant intellectual disabilities, who might have very significant physical disabilities. And really, we really need to work hard to find out how can we make a ceremony that is meaningful for them and where they can participate in a way that is meaningful. It's not, we don't want to have a child sort of sitting there and have the ceremony happen around them. We want it to be a celebration of them and something that they are participating in and something that they are, it's not just about the day itself, but like they know we want them to know what's going on and have an understanding of what it means. Like they're they're getting older, they can become responsible. They're entering into this community, this Jewish family, and we want it so it really is a range.
Right. Just that, yeah, since I know you had certain chapters on certain ones, but I do recommend I always recommend Gateways for people to go to for wonderful Jewish disability inclusion and resources and curriculums. So um look at the book and you'll see the whole checklist. I also wanted to say I appreciate some of you, and Rebecca, you just mentioned it again. A lot of times people are focused so much on this one ceremony and one milestone, but you're mentioning again, and I always have it in mind, not to just think about this one event, but how to continue the journey in Judaism and their connection and spirituality and community and all of that. So there's so much emphasis on the bar and bat mitzvah day and the party and all that goes with that. But then, as I think all of you have said, what happens after that? It's
And
it's a process.
And if I could just add, we've been seeing that a lot in recent years. It used to be that the Torah reading was the big thing. They have to read from the Torah. They have to read as much as they can. And a lot of parents are coming to us now saying, Torah reading's great, but he's only going to do that once. I want my child to learn, instead of learning a lot of Torah, I want my child to learn the prayers that he's going to say every day or every week. I want my child to learn how to say Kaddish so that they can say the mourner's prayer for me after I die. And so the parents are really coming to us with that perspective of it's about more than the day. It's about building that foundation for the rest of their Jewish life.
You know, when I comment on Rebecca, what Rebecca was saying is it's so important. My son now knows that when he's called to the Torah for one of his cousins, bar and bat mitzvah, he knows to step to the side and wait and support the next person who comes on. He knows he can go to synagogue and stand and sit and understand everything that's happening. And so our it's such an important in the family feels often for the first time that they belong. And for so many synagogues, I hope there's some rabbis here listening, for so many synagogues that are worried about attendance, right? And they don't have enough congregants. It's like, bring us in, bring us in, not just on Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month, for Neshuva, the synagogue that I belong to and my son belongs to, we've brought in, starting with Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month, where the Miracle Project students lead the service. We've brought in, well, we had 10 deaf congregants join us. We had 20 autistic people. It's like we're increasing. We want to come to synagogue. We need to come to synagogue. So let us. It does impact the whole family, Tom. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I think what Elaine says is so true. And whatever the congregation is, whatever the religion is, we can expand that to whatever the organization is. We are going beyond inclusion. It's a step. And what we're really looking for is belonging, a sense of belonging. And that's something that I talk about when I travel. I speak extensively at various conferences around the world. So far, I've spoken at 58 countries talking about autism. And the first thing I do after getting accepted to speak at a conference or being invited is, where is the closest Chabad house? Where is the closest place that I can observe Shabbat? And I find it. Usually it's close by. It's been as close as being attached to the hotel that I'm staying in, and as far as 500 miles away. No, I don't go 500 miles away, but have traveled 100 miles to go to Shabbat. And it's this message of belonging. We all belong. And that's what I talk about at the various places I go. It's an add-on to the conferences. And often when the rabbi and other people find out what brings me to speak at the conference, they get very interested, and it becomes a sort of impromptu autism conference, or at least an autism discussion. And I think the more that we can educate people about autism and by extension neurodivergence and difference, the better off we'll all be. If God wanted us all to be a certain way, and you can fill in the blank, it could be Christian, it could be Muslim, it could be Jewish, it could be autistic. If he wanted us to be that way, then we'd all be that way. But no, he doesn't. He wants variety. He wants diversity, and all of us just living together in harmony.
Steve, I wanted to piggyback on what you said about Chabad, because I actually had a couple of references. When I was reaching for those stories, I was thinking that most people know Chabad as being, very, very traditional, and everyone looks the same way with in terms of dress. But the level of inclusion in Chabad in many ways is extraordinary, and this real core belief of everybody being created in God's image. So, you know, that applies to everyone, including people with disabilities. But I'll tell you how this connects to some other parts of the book. We talked about using supports and building community, and sometimes when you're teaching a kid, it's not just the Hebrew school teachers. I mean, you have to really think about who are the supports in the kid's life. And when I was one of my daughters went to Binghamton, and the Chabad couple who runs Chabad there, where they get like 400 kids for every Friday night dinner, she said she knows my interest in disability. She said, "You got to meet my sister. They're the Chabad couple in Munich. They're the ones who really were there been there for decades." And they said, she said, I wrote a story for Chabad.org about their son's bar mitzvah. And they said that their son, this is in the book, it's an anecdote. They said their son has autism, and he also wears cochlear implants. And they said that, like in Chabad, they really get it that this is about marking the change of status. And in fact, they almost never let anybody read Torah, no matter how skilled you are, because you don't want anybody to feel, not so good about themselves. Even if you're great, you may not be fantastic. So therefore, nobody does it, except for the professional Torah reader. So you can move beyond that and think of what's going to be a nice way to mark this occasion. But their issue was they oftentimes what marks the occasion is usually putting on tefillin, which are the leather straps and boxes with pieces of the Bible inside of them. And all they wanted was for their autistic son to be able to do that. The problem was, he was taking his cochlear implants and flushing them down the toilet. Okay, and that's a very, very, very costly and problematic thing. So they were even more worried about the tefillin, which is sacred, if he didn't respect them. So they did what any sensible person would do. They turned to the non-Jewish woman from Singapore, who is his therapist, his ABA therapist, who had taught him how to get onto the school bus step by step by step by step. And they said, I know, we'll teach her how to do the tefillin, and we'll make a prototype. Not these sacred things, but we'll take something with string or yarn. And I'm just picturing this image of this Chabad rabbi and all of his garb and all of his tradition, teaching this woman from Singapore who's a professional how to teach the son how to do this. And all he wanted was for him to be able to stay in the synagogue and say the Shema that Elaine had mentioned, say that special prayer, and put on the boxes for a short period of time, and then go out and run around with his friends, and then have a communal-wide celebration in his honor, which they did, and that was the story. And I thought that this is really, if the most religious people can be so out of the box and not be so hung up with the kid reading the entire portion and going through the rigmarole of what Rebecca said is kind of like the standard. It was really beautiful. Another Chabad related story that I mentioned in the book is that I worked with a kid who was in a residential treatment program. There's a lot of these programs in Idaho and in Utah. And, because anything that's 1 in 5 is the same in our 1 in 5, it doesn't matter if you're, what your religion is. I mean, it affects all of us in the same numbers. So it stands to reason that there will be Jewish kids and bar mitzvah preparing Jewish kids in those programs. And I remember I would have Zoom lessons with a boy in his very non-Jewish social worker's office. And the Chabad, they brought him to the Chabad rabbi's house in Idaho, in Boise. They drove him very far to Boise to practice the Torah. So again, it's the non-Jewish staff and the Jewish teacher in New York on Zoom and the Chabad rabbi. And I think that it just shows that there's this, there are a lot of out-of-the-box options. There are a lot of ways to make this special. There are a lot of ways to bring, not obvious people on board as the team. And those are just two. I mean, obviously I could tell Elaine stories, but I think that if we're talking about, I know Stephen's a big fan of Chabad, and I think for a good reason, but this radical inclusivity in attitude and this willingness to sort of think of other options really, really is very impressive.
And just to build on what you're saying, Howard, I think a lot of rabbis, when they're approached by a family or when they realize that there's somebody with a disability in their synagogue coming up, they get a little nervous because they are not special educators. They are not necessarily experts in all of this. And I think a lot of what I got out of reading everyone's chapters in the book is that they don't necessarily have to be. Gabrielle Kaplan-Meyer's chapter, I think, was about building a team. Like there are people who are experts in disability and they may not be Jewish, but rabbis, but they can help support the process. Rabbis can speak to parents. Rabbis can ask, who are the people who can help us figure out this educational process, help help figure out how to lay tefillin or how to sit on the bima or how to recite a prayer in Hebrew. That these people exist, and the rabbis don't need to be specialists. They just need to be open. They need to be excited to try something new. They need to be, again, they need to come from a place of yes and say, we can do this. I'm here. I can be the ringmaster, but I'm really, my job is here to listen to you and figure out how to make this work.
Yeah, and then just to add to that, before I have to go to work, I do have to get off. I'm doing access interviews for autistic youth who are going to be on in a film. So, but along these lines, when I consult quite a bit with clergy around the country, Jewish, non-Jewish, and in terms of building the team of how do we use creative, bring in a dancer, bring in an artist. We had one student who's an animator, and he animated his bar mitzvah portion, his parsha. We had another student who acted it out. Bring in an acting coach. Bring in, we all of our classes are fully inclusive. So bring in we have bar mitzvah buddies that are non-disabled and neurotypical, and someone that let them have a peer-to-peer relationship of learning, and it's a community of support. For my son, he types to communicate, and we weren't sure if he was understanding what was going on, and his non-Jewish speech therapist was typing with him and said called me and said, "Well, this is what Neil typed today. We weren't sure if he knew what was going on." And he typed with his non-Jewish speech therapist who had never been to a bar mitzvah before. Neil typed, "Yes, I understand. My bar mitzvah is going to be a great celebration. It is when I make my commitment to the Torah." And she calls me and she goes, "Is that right?" I'm like, "Yeah." And even more so because an adopted child, even though he'd been through, his conversion and everything, at 13, he gets to be asked again whether he wants to be Jewish. And so the fact that he typed when I make my commitment, so mom made it for him when he was a baby, but when I make my commitment. So we want to speak to everyone's highest level of intelligence and honor the neshama, honor the soul, honor the spirit. Every single B'nai Mitzvah I've been privileged to be a part of, I can see this extra soul coming in, and what a light and a knowingness. And I think it's, a representation of when we were all at Sinai, and that light, that ineffable. And then the other thing I wanted to say was I speak also in churches and other faith-based organizations, and there's so much commonality. I mean, I love hearing the Psalms sung, and there's so much more where we are similar than we're different. So what an honor to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Elaine. Um, for those speakers that may need to leave, um, we want to thank you so much. It was a very engaging dialogue. I feel like we're just getting started in a way, but for people who would like to stay on a bit more and have questions, because we did want to allow time for additional questions, you can, and we'll try to answer. So, any of our speakers who need to leave, please feel free. And thank you so much again for being here. And for those who can stay, please stay, and we'll have some Q&A time. Um, Howard, I did want to mention uh, I was particularly liking the format that you did have voices of people, and almost many of the chapters have sections of, I don't want to call them case studies, but like personal accounts. So could you just say why you did it like that, and like how you decided the format like that?
It's a good question. I think, you always, it really was part of the evolution of the book. I think that we really, I mean, this is always the criticism. If you're writing a book, all the experts are writing a book about this thing, and you're not part of that community, it just seems very much more impactful. I mean, I think that we don't even know all the authors who they didn't disclose, that as part of their credentials, but we just thought that there were people who had really important stories to tell. And I think that people were very articulate, right? And I think it just really, you could just feel the stories. I think that just telling it in their own voices was really nice. And as one of the things you might notice that we there were no gray boxes in those stories. They were just the person's story. The story was the story. It didn't need another example, right? From the kids that I've taught over the years, they really stand alone. And I think if a person is a non-speaker, and if a person is, off the charts cognitively, but has all these other disabilities, it just leaves a person trying to make sense of the world. How is it person? How is it like one of those Chabad stories I didn't tell? There's another story of a Chabad, the son of a Chabad emissary who was autistic, and his gift was being able to read the entire Torah portion, right? Which is something that almost nobody can do. Like, it was like the longest portion, 150 verses. And I think it just lets people, it's the same experience we have in camp when you have a disabilities program, and 1 minute the person is having a meltdown in the field, and 2 hours later the person is leading the camp in prayer. And it just leaves the so-called neurotypical people, 9-year-olds, scratching their head. How is it possible that this person could be so, like, so disabled and so talented at the same time? And I think that's what tries to come, but that's what comes through in these stories, whether it's Yishai or whether it's Stephen or whether it's Jacob Artson. It just really shows the range of what ability and disability looks like.
I feel like even today, it's so much more impactful talking about people's direct experience, than in theory or but it's nice how you also have practical chapters too, such as the gateways, Rebecca's chapters from an educational view, and there's a few other, like I think Matan, Meredith, I believe she has a chapter, and I think she was here or she is here. Highly recommend Matan as another major Jewish disability inclusion and education organization. So, but I definitely was impacted by the personal stories. And for myself, um, the one that I was very impacted by was about the um, blind girl and her experience, Batya Sperling, and then she also wrote the chapter with her mom, and I'm in a group with her mom as one of the facilitators. So I really recommend. It's a very unique perspective. And we've had a lot of programs about blindness and low vision. So if you're interested, that's a great chapter. And Stephen, I had a question for you since you're still with us, which is great. Um, you talked about how you kind of created your own way. Did you say you ended up memorizing by listening to tapes? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I should never turn on the mute because I always forget to turn it off. But as it says in the biblical book of Proverbs, 22, 6, uh, it's important to teach the person as they are, to accept them as they are, and to work with the individual. And that's what I see happening so often with getting back to Chabad. The Chabad rabbis, the people who are involved in the organization are incredibly inclusive. They live a very observant life. And yet at the same time, they're happy to accept anybody who is expressing a desire to express their Judaism and to learn more about it. And so with me, since music is an important part of my life, my parents sensed that, and they sensed that I could learn musically. I could learn it as a song. There are others who may learn the prayer or maybe not learn the prayer in other ways. And there's so many ways to express the B'nai mitzvah. Even if it's walking up to the bima and then walking back down. And again, it's the observance of the passage into adulthood, which can be understood in so many different ways.
And how did you create your best learning way? Was it just trial and error, or did you have the rabbi or teachers or mentors to help you?
Well, I would say um, uh, my parents were the ones who did it. And after running into dead ends with typical Sunday school, with typical type tutoring, it was they who figured out that I could learn it by learning it as a song, essentially, is what it is. And so what that means is it's important to know the individual as an individual.
There was one, I also think the same thing. I sort of will start at the end and say, this is what we're striving for. And there are lots of ways to get there. Let's figure out, like what are your strengths, and I've had families with kids with learning disabilities, and the parent says, geez, if only he could learn 3 lines, it'd be a miracle. It turns out the kid is an amazing guitar player, with perfect pitch.
Mm.
And I looked great because he picked it up so beautifully by ear, and it was really effortless. Whereas another kid who is more classically, sort of a smart kid, it's not so simple. It's a different skill. You have to have a good auditory and visual memory to pick it up. And you can be smart without those things, right? And it's not so simple. I worked with a kid where the more outrageous we got in the teaching, the more excited he got. We would stand up on his furniture and bang out rhythms on the ceiling with drumsticks and name his stuffed animals. We mentioned about name his stuffed animals. Some of those hard words like Hamavorach became one of his stuffed animals. And you just have to, it's like a lot of what Elaine does this, but you're like you're playing this role as an actor, and you're just trying it. There's no script. It's just you're doing what works. And that's the fun part. It would be very boring for me to be a cantor in a synagogue teaching 50 kids a year, because the poor cantor has to probably take a method and get 50 kids through the system, and you can't be so flexible. I know it works. This is how we're going to do it. Next kid for the next 20-minute session. I know that's not fair but if you work with only a handful of kids, you can really say what works for you. And if Stephen's your student, it's different than another student. It wouldn't work. I mean, if the cantor said, "Well, Stephen said it didn't work," he said, "This is the method. I know what we're doing." You wouldn't have celebrated bar mitzvah.
Right.
Right. Actually, Michael Levy, he had commented that when his bar mitzvah was in the 1960s, and none of these resources existed, and I'm sure it was much, much more uh, challenging. And even I had my bar mitzvah in the 90s, and like you're saying, Howard, it felt like, I hate to say, a little bit of a cookie cutter kind of an experience. Like you have to really try to make it your own, but the way that people are going through the process is the same. So it's very exciting in a way that to hear you talk about these very customized ways, and using people's strengths and interests or making it musical or something personal, something more unique for each person, each kid. And I did have one or two more general questions. Would you say that um, there are still ways that this can be improved? Obviously, so much progress has been made. Are there still things you think can be done better?
Well, I think the more that we can, I'm not on mute, good. The more that we can educate, the more that we can educate religious leaders uh, of all religions about people with differences. Taking biblical figures who, well, we certainly can't diagnose them, but we can look at their characteristics and say, well, they happen. It looks like they may have had the characteristic of autism, for example, or ADHD, or Moses, who is, quote, heavy of tongue, difficulty to speak. But he seemed to do a pretty good job at leading, and he received support. And so by bringing it in that way, I think that could be a great help.
Mm,
Like I would say, I think it's also about, again, I have a lot of compassion for religious schools and for synagogues because you have to have these systems because it doesn't feel fair, if one person has to do X and everybody doesn't. And some people try to cut corners. And I think that I would just think about having lots of options, that one option is to do this on Saturday morning, another option is to do it Saturday afternoon, another option is to do it on Monday morning of a holiday weekend, or there's a lot of different ways to do it in the smaller chapel, in the bigger chapel, in the rabbi's office, just to get out of that way of thinking that it is a certain way. And and that even I think there's a chapter about the Devar Torah, about the speech. That there's a that I think what I love about that, if you say the standard is that everybody has to teach Torah, everybody has to teach. But you know what? You could teach by getting up there and giving a speech. You could teach by doing a comedy routine. You could teach by writing a comic book. You could teach by doing a PowerPoint. You could have a dialogue with the rabbi, back and forth. There's a lot of ways to do that. So you can do an art. I worked with a girl, and I'm also mindful of the time we're going. I worked with a girl where she had two strikes against her. She had a lot of social anxiety, and she also had learning disabilities. And getting up and opening up her mouth in front of a lot of people was just not going to happen. But she was a very gifted artist and illustrating a lot of biblical things that she had learned in drawings and paintings. And then the celebration was mounting some of her artwork on easels, and people would drink wine and take hors d'oeuvres and look at her artwork, and she didn't have to say a word, right? I worked with a boy similarly. He had no problem learning. He loved learning history. He just was not going to stand up and speak. But he was very happy to have me videotape him in his living room, and he pushed play on the at the Bar Mitzvah celebration on a Sunday, and everybody watched his beautiful presentation. So I think it's just it seems so basic, and it's to all of us it's very obvious, but I think it's just to kind of like help clergy be open to the possibilities that there are other ways to get at that same goal. If the goal is to teach, well, what does it look like? You can look 10 different ways, right? So
Yeah, and I think the word you said, fair. People often confuse the word fair with equal. Everybody has to do it exactly the same way. And really what fair is giving everybody, here comes the equal, an equal chance of success. And that success is defined in as many ways as there are people who are getting, observing their B'nai mitzvah. Uh, that is success.
they said beautiful.
Yeah.
that's wonderful. And I think we're all now, inspired to think outside of the box and not just, as you said before, not just for Jewish communities, but, there's ceremonies in other faith traditions too. And I think it just opens our minds to, think in a different way and maybe speak to the faith leaders to also think in a different way. And I hope that more faith leaders and educators will also um, not just read your book, but try to learn about some of these approaches because we need our leaders. And as you said in one of the chapters, it's a community effort, and it really helps if everybody's on the same wavelength and mindset. So thank you so much again. And I did ask if there's any questions, but I don't see. There are some comments in the chat which you can look at, but I don't see any questions. If there are follow-up questions, we can always share Howard's and the speaker's email with you if you have additional comments, concerns, feedback. So thank you all so much. And I'll turn it over either to Howard or Tom to close us.
Okay. Thank you, Howard, and thank you, Stephen, and Elaine and Rebecca, who've already gone. But as Deborah Sarna commented it in the chat, that she's already using your book and some of the ideas, and feels like this could be groundbreaking and very impactful to many educators and clergy and others too that so I hope it is. It's a wonderful book. I just really loved reading the different perspectives, and that just is so enriching. And so thank you for getting this together, Howard. And I do hope more and more people will check out your book for sure and read those. Such a rich, diverse group of people that made contributions to the book and wrote chapters. This has been fun because whenever you gather a lot of people with the same heart for disability, and it's a wonderful thing. And so I hope our audience has gotten as much out of this as I have, and uh, for those of you that are still on, this has been recorded. We will send the recording out to everybody and panelists as well. So feel free to share it with whoever you would like in all of your networks, especially during this month of JDAIM. So any closing comments there, Howard? Oh, I think you're muted.
Thank you for doing this. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome, Stephen. And thank you for all the work that everybody is doing and the interest you've shown and all. God bless you in all of your endeavors. And we will continue our conversations and hopefully meet again. So everyone take care.
You too.